Good evening, everyone. My name is Will Severn, and I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service, majoring in Science, Technology, and International Affairs with a minor in German. I became involved with geopolitics during my first year here on campus by attending geopolitics events and fellows discussion groups, and by serving on the advanced team. This fall, I served as team lead for Fall 2024 Fellow Rick Wiley's Student Strategy Team, and last spring I had the pleasure of serving on the Student Strategy Team of one of tonight's panelists, Machalagh Carr. As a big fan of the Fellows Program, I encourage you all to come to the open house later this week to meet the Spring 2025 Fellows that will be joining us this semester. It's been a few years since we've seen single-party control of both the presidency and Congress. Tonight we will hear from three political professionals who have had experience working in this environment and who can share with us what a GOP trifecta means for governing the country. With us tonight are Machalagh Carr, Spring 2024 Geopolitics Fellow and former Chief of Staff to Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, Mike Dubke, Fall 2017 Geopolitics Fellow, founding partner at BlackRock Group and former White House Communications Director at the beginning of the first Trump administration, and Sharon Soderstrom, who most recently served as Senate Republican Leader Mitch McConnell's Chief of Staff, and during her career has also served as Senior Advisor to two previous Senate Republican leaders. Moderating this conversation tonight is Geopolitics Executive Director Mo Walethi, and you can join the conversation on social media by tagging @Geopolitics. Now please join us all in welcoming Machalagh Carr, Mike Dubke, Sharon Soderstrom, and Mo Walethi.
Well, thanks for braving the cold weather to come join us for this event for what is actually the kickoff event for our Geopolitics 10th anniversary year celebration. Throughout this entire year, we are, it's actually funny, I was reflecting on this quite a bit recently. So when I came on campus, came back to Georgetown 10 years ago to launch the Institute, I came in expecting to build an institute that was going to look at politics as I had known it, practicing it, and then 10 days later, Donald Trump came down the escalator. And regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, I think most people would agree, politics has looked very different over the past 10 years than it did before that. This year, throughout our 10th anniversary, we are going to be looking at what the next 10 years might look like. Our theme for this year is the future of public service. And so it feels very fitting that we would start with this conversation with these individuals because it's been a hell of a 24 hours as the new Republican trifecta is complete as of noon yesterday. And Republicans are in a position to help set the direction of our government for the foreseeable future, at least. And so tonight, what I'm hoping we can do is really dive into that a little bit and figure out what a GOP trifecta really could mean, both in terms of our politics and policy. And so I want to start by asking you guys, we've all been around politics a long time. The word mandate gets thrown around after every election. Regardless of the results, someone claims they've got a mandate. This was actually, despite, and I'm not saying this, the Democrat in me is not saying this to take anything away, it was a decisive victory. But it was also a very close victory in many ways. And so I guess my question is, does the Republican Party truly have a mandate, and what is it? Right? Let's start big and then work our way down. What is the mandate that the Republican Party is claiming, the message that voters sent as they begin at least the next 2 years of one-party control? Who wants to kick it off?
Well, I'm happy to take the first answer to that. I do think that there is a lot to be said for a party that has come closer to core issues that actually motivated voters. And the economy certainly was one of those issues. And I think even my friends in the Democrat Party will say that they started to drift away from things that were bread and butter and pocketbook issues. I think the realignment that our party is going through, where a lot of working class voters have come our way, is an indication that Trump somehow was able to connect with those kind of core pocketbook issues. And secondly, I do think the border and what is happening on the border really did move voters, even independent voters, back our way. So some of it is making sure that you stay in touch with what is actually happening and on voters' minds. And when a party loses touch with that, elections tend to self-correct that. So I think on those two core issues, there was a bit of a message from the electorate that they wanted a change in the discussion and the direction.
Yeah, I agree with Sharon in a lot of ways. You talk about core kind of issues that the voters are talking to. My bias shows a little here. When Mo asked that question, I thought, let's kind of get back to first principles. What is the purpose of government? And we look at, the absolute devastation that we're seeing in California. I think it kind of brings up this idea that we've talked about a lot in the past of luxury beliefs, right? If every single possible thing in the world is taken care of, then you have the luxury to be really aggressively thinking that the only issue of the day is inclusivity. But that's something that we don't have time or energy, mental or emotional energy, to spend on if we can't put our own fires out, if we can't protect our own borders, if we can't pay for groceries, if we can't afford fuel for our vehicles. And so I think the mandate is like, let's let the government do what the government's supposed to do. And if they stay focused on kind of back to first principles, then that will only broaden that realignment and broaden kind of this new coalition that we're seeing of voters that came across for Trump.
Well, I think I might take issue with trifecta. Because I think, and I'd be curious if the students agree with this, I think Republicans kind of control the Supreme Court too. Not to scare you, Mo. But we've got in the next 2 years, we've got a government that is, for better or worse, going to be controlled by more conservative thinkers than we've had before, without the restrictions that from outside imposition, only the restrictions that they impose upon themselves in terms of the direction of this country. And when I was having this conversation with somebody the other day about, where is America? Why is it going back and forth and back and forth? And I think it's explained by the voter that voted for Obama, then for Trump, then for Biden, and then for Trump again. That we're living in a period of time where there's so much change that the speed of change is coming at us at such a great pace that it's really difficult for our political parties to understand, how to appeal and say, here's some bedrock beliefs that you should have. I'm not sure that either party really has that right now for the American people, but I do think that Republicans in this last election focused on the economy, and they looked at the things that were really affecting the pocketbook issues for Americans, their day-to-day. You had a president with a historically low approval rating who waited way too long to get out of the way. You had a vice president who never moved off of that initial euphoria. I called it a sugar high when she hit mid-September, I think mainly dragged down by that president. We had a Senate map that looked great for us, so we were going to win the Senate anyway. And then I was really surprised by the House. I did suspect that this was not going to be a majority in the House, the Senate, and have the administration for Republicans. But I think the economic issues really came to the forefront, and they just. I'll end with this. My wife's aunt in Louisville, Kentucky, said, "I decided I'm voting for Trump when I saw Kamala Harris standing on stage with Beyonce versus Donald Trump in the garbage truck, and I felt like he understood everyday Americans." Now, this is a billionaire, right? But he had a better idea of what people were going through than the campaign that the Democrats put on, which was more of an elitist campaign. So I'm throwing a lot of these Easter eggs out there so your students can really come after us. But that's where my thinking is.
And they will.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, right? And I say this as the sole Democrat up on stage. When you look at elections globally over the past year, progressives won many, conservatives won many. The one trend you saw over and over around the world was throw the bums out.
Incumbents lost. Yep.
Right? Incumbents lost just about everywhere, whether it was the Tories losing in the UK or the center-right party in Germany. We're seeing it everywhere.
Center-left in France.
Right? Center-left in France. We're seeing it everywhere. And it really doesn't follow the traditional left versus right ideology. And listening to you guys, I think there are a lot of themes that you can see around the world. An anti-elitist, anti-establishment feeling out there. And so you guys are now the establishment. Republicans have now assumed the mantle of the establishment. We started to see how the president is going to approach that, right? We started to see how he was going to approach that with his first wave of executive orders. But again, staying at the 20,000-foot level first, how is that going to manifest itself over the next 99 days, right? In the first 100 days of one-party control, what should these folks expect to see from a government that says it wants to take on the establishment, says it wants to fight for the working class, says it wants to get back to first principles? What does that actually look like? What's the agenda?
Let me just out of the gate address the first part of your question, which is, and I said this in kind of my opening statement, I think the restrictions on where Republicans are going to go are going to be more internal than external. We have had a euphoria of the inaugural, and the EOs, those are easy. All the president has to do is sit down and sign this. Now that's governing, now it's hard. Now you've got 100 senators, 53 Republicans, but 100 senators. You've got, depending on who makes it and who doesn't for the cabinet and how many other people Trump decides to pull out of the House Republican caucus, you've got, was it 218 now?
219.
Okay, 219 that, and we've got a couple of special elections coming up. So we've got, it's a really tight majority, and I think we're gonna be determining, and when I say we, Republicans are gonna be determining how far this actually goes, and it's gonna start to expose some rifts within the party. But in terms of what policies are gonna go first, I think the legislative branch is going to drive that now more so than the executive branch and all the EOs. The easy part's over. The hard part's just about to begin.
I think you're exactly right. The rubber hits the road when Congress has to organize, and I think the Senate and the House are different animals, but they have this somewhat the same dynamic. You spoke about different flavors of the Republican Party, and we saw last year, particularly in the House, how difficult it was to actually manage those flavors. I think with the new president, that becomes easier because you do have a huge desire, and it's a natural desire when you're in this position to try to give some successes to a new president. So that's, I think, marginally easier, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem. And furthermore, you have thrown into the mix, in about 6 weeks, the government runs out of funding. Speaker Johnson almost lost his speaker race, not from doing a year-long deal with Democrats, but doing a pretty straightforward continuing resolution that doesn't change much. So in the middle of the works, you're going to have the first moment in March 14th, where the government runs out of funds, and you, by the numbers in the Senate and the makeup of the House, you will have to compromise with Democrats. So very early in the Trump administration, there will be a moment where Democrats will begin to be able to flex their muscle. It's true of the House in an old-fashioned House. Every single House Republican would vote for whatever got put forward, and you wouldn't need a single Democrat. But that is not the House today. And in the Senate, every president under the sun hates the Senate, but senators kind of love the Senate. And I would argue that the Senate was a brilliant institution founded by our founders to make sure that the swings that you noted, at least in law, are much harder. That pendulum is harder to swing. The president is able to do things quickly by executive order that seems to change the trajectory of the country, but when it comes to legislation, I would argue that stability of American law is one of the brilliance, but it is also one of the huge frustrations of a House of Representatives that wants to go fast with no compromise, and a new president that doesn't want to have to compromise with the other party. So that moment's coming sooner than we would think. And I think that's going to be the first real test and the first real kind of crisis moment for leadership. However, the way around to that is what everybody's been talking about, is a very cumbersome tool called reconciliation. And it is designed to get around the Senate filibuster, and we did great things with it when Trump was first in office. The 2017 tax bill was done that way. And so the conversation you're hearing right now is, how can we take the tool of simple majority rule and try to get around the problems that we will have down the road when we have to deal with the other side?
What's going on in the House?
Well, I think Sharon touched on a lot of really interesting points. When you ask what the agenda is, I think if you look at reconciliation, which is, of course, the phrase that we use, but what we're talking about is we're reconciling the budget, right? So getting back to kind of what we're doing, what we're talking about, the reason you have this opportunity of reconciling the budget. And so I would like to highlight that all of this stuff is really teed back to the economy. It's teed back to, when we talk about declaring an emergency, an energy emergency, right? That's about the economy. Yes, it's about energy, but why is energy so closely tied to the economy? Because when energy prices are so high, then they're directly tied to the cost of groceries, but it's all interrelated, and it's all interrelated with the skyrocketing national debt as we talk about the debt limit needing to be increased again. And so I think this kind of reckoning of the size of our federal government, the amount of money, amount of taxpayer dollars that we are spending, all dollars that the government has at their exposure are taxpayer dollars. And I think it's a really interesting time right now to kind of take a breath and make sure that we're having a government that's working efficiently for the purposes of keeping the country safe and secure.
I want to come back in a moment to talk about some of the specific dynamics in the White House, the House, and the Senate. But staying sort of big picture for another moment, I mean, to hear most analysts talk about it, and I would say many Democratic analysts as well, the election results were tied specifically to a sense that Republicans would do a better job at reducing the price of milk and eggs, and two, that Democrats had just gotten too preachy. Right? That we had just gotten very condescending and were a little elitist in our messaging, and that they just believed that we don't have time for all of that because milk and eggs is too expensive. Mike, you said yesterday with the executive orders, that was the easy part. That got right? But many of those issues really didn't do anything to touch on the price of milk and eggs. And so I'm just curious, now that we're moving forward, right? And the president has leaned into many of those cultural issues, right? Undoing the Democrats' preachiness on a number of things. Where do they go from here? Because I think a lot of people looked at yesterday and said, right on, right? Way to go. But you also had a lot of people out there say, this is what you're leading with? So what is the tone that the beginning of the administration is setting, and where do they go from there?
Well, I think on some of the issues, I don't know that they're necessarily social issues. I mean, immigration is a big, big issue, and that by declaring a national emergency at the border, they were able to take some actions to shut that down. But to the point that you were trying to make, and this is where we come back to the legislature, it is easier to call for a national emergency at the border or in energy. Now, energy development here in this country makes money for Americans, especially if we're going to continue to export LNG to Europe, to Asia, to other places. So from an economic standpoint, the lowering of the cost of energy lowers the cost of all products. So I guess, Mo, I'd argue with the premise of your question. I do think on the energy side, that was a broad strike against higher prices by lowering or potentially having the markets lower the cost of energy. But in terms of the economic policies, that's the legislature. That's where it gets messy. That's where you really have to dive into it. So I do think there was an economic message yesterday. It's that weird thing of, tying it all together.
And just, quick nerd note on one of the executive orders. My personal favorite was there was an executive order specifically pushing back on OECD's Pillar 2 and the nonsensical idea that unelected international bodies get to set tax policy for America.
Yes.
Just a quick little refresher course, 1773, they passed the Tax Act, right? We throw a bunch of tea in the harbor, we have a big fit, we start a revolution, we sign a document, we start a war, we found a country. For 231 years, we prevented the Europeans from taxing our industry. And then Janet Yellen was like, no, let's let Europeans tax our industry. And I don't even care if American companies pay taxes to America. Let's go ahead and let them line the treasuries at Versailles, because I don't want companies to grow that fast and have that much money. And Trump started to kind of undo that. And so for people that are just watching from afar, that OECD executive order might not have been really flashy and sexy. To me, it was my personal favorite.
It's not a GU politics event with Machalagh Carr unless 1773 comes up at some point in one of her answers. Let's talk about the three guys who are sort of leading this trifecta. We can bring in the fourth branch if you really want to go there, Mike.
I think Roberts is a Bills fan, so I might go there.
And I want to start down at the end. And when we get through this, there's so many other questions I'm going to want to ask, but we're going to start to invite you guys in after we go down this, because you'll have better questions than I do anyway. Sharon, people have a sense of who Donald Trump is. Whether or not they have a sense of who Donald Trump 2.0 is, I don't know yet. And we've had a chance to see Speaker Johnson in action before, but I think there are a lot of people out there who know nothing about John Thune, the new Senate Majority Leader. Tell us a little bit about what you think his approach to leading the Senate majority is going to be like.
He knows the Senate well, and for a majority leader, that's extraordinarily important. He served as the Senate whip for many years, which meant he was the one who was on the floor talking to members, finding out what their concerns were, working with them, trying to keep them together on votes when they were important. But to run the Senate well, you need to know the personalities of the Senate well, and he has an incredible background that way. He is a person of a lot of principle. He sort of comes from South Dakota. I enjoy him very much because his approach to people is humble but decisive. He wants to get the Senate working again, and that is very important to him, to get ideas on all sides to have the Senate be able to amend and work its will. He worked very, very closely, particularly with Senator Sinema, who was maybe a bit of a thorn in the flesh to Senate Democrats when they ran the Senate, but I would argue was one of the most effective senators because she was trying to find out how you could bring the Senate together. So he is, I think, well equipped for this job. He also would like to deliver some victories to the president. He started with the Laken-Riley Act, which is a border act. It means that it speaks to deportation of criminal aliens. When they're detained with a criminal record, they get deported. And so he's very interested in trying to get some early wins to the president. One of the conversations that we're having between the House and Senate right now is, do you go big or small in reconciliation? His idea of taking concrete steps and trying to move forward, I think, speaks to trying to get some early momentum to the president where it's needed. He is, so I think he is somebody who knows the Senate well. He is somebody who's prepared to lead. And he is somebody, at least on the inside game, who's very well known. He's an interesting member. He is the first member to knock off a sitting leader of the other party. He took down Tom Daschle. And so the arc of his career, from being the David to the Goliath, and now turning into the Goliath himself, I think is quite an interesting trajectory.
Machalagh, Speaker Johnson has an even smaller majority than he did before. He's got elements of the Republican caucus that is just as ornery as ever. He doesn't have Matt Gaetz to contend with.
Who?
But it's still, we've already seen some challenges. He does have a president, though, now, right, of his party. How do you see him navigating these first 100 days, especially on issues like reconciliation and some of the more contentious spending issues?
Yeah, I think he's going to be just fine. I think he had a really, it's like nice to have like a little tryout, right, for a job like this. So, he came into the job at a time he wasn't anticipating coming into the job in the middle of a Congress, and he took it on, and there were some bumps, and I think he learned a lot. And so it's almost like that was kind of like a, nobody's going to hold it against him for any perceived errors, but also he learned a ton. He developed a really good relationship with Hakeem Jeffries. I think he had a really good relationship with McConnell, and now he and Thune are kind of forging ahead. What really matters here is that there aren't that many orneries. I mean, I know people can say, oh, but 2 people voted against him for 5 seconds. I'm like, that's not like real opposition. They made their point. I think, there is one member of the party that in the House that will just not want to do a lot of things and stand on principle, and that's Thomas Massie. And I think that's okay. We'll have 2 or 3 votes. And so everything else, I think, will be a very interesting dance, and the choreographer will be Trump.
And before we go to audience questions, Mike, do we know Donald Trump? Was Donald Trump 2.0 going to be markedly different in terms of governing style and approach to the job than the first time around?
Trump 2.0 is Trump 1.0 with confidence. I'll leave it at that. He knows what he wants to do now, and he knows he's been there, done that in terms of how to navigate this. I think the speed at which he's moving is going to be a lot faster. We had, I don't know how many EOs we had yesterday. It was less than 100, but it was like 76. In Trump 1.0, we had 1 on day 1. We had 12 after the first month. There was a lot of not sure-footedness by the administration, and this is the part of the administration that I was in. There were a lot of, we were listening to lawyers, we were listening to others. There is a decisiveness, I think, in Trump 2.0 that will be the difference. But Donald Trump's going to be Donald Trump. I mean, what you see is what you get. You should not think that, when he says something, that is kind of where he's going. the pardons and commutations for the individuals involved in January 6th is a perfect example. Jason Miller, as Deputy Chief of Staff, was out there yesterday saying we're going to do this case by case. The Vice President was out on Fox News a week ago saying we're going to go case by case, and then he signs an executive order that it's full pardons and commutations for 1,500 people. He made the decision. Now, I think he's pushing the envelope to see how much he can get away with to a certain extent, but this is what you're going to get from Donald Trump, especially when he can do it by signing his signature.
We've seen a number of, I promise we're going to come to you next, but we've seen a number of Republican senators today even stand up, showing some, and House members, I think even the Speaker showed some tepidness towards the J6 pardons, right? And I guess, for me, one, it was an interesting look at this one specific issue, but two, how disagreement between them may play out between the legislature and the executive. And I'm not sure, while we saw some pushback, I'm not sure I got a good sense as to, maybe we did. Maybe just tepid response is about as strong pushback as we'll get. But where do you see that going when they don't see eye to eye?
I think it will depend on the issue that is before members. I think many members agree with a lot of his policy positions. I do think you saw some pushback on January 6th. Members were in the Capitol, as was I. My last conversation on January 6th in the middle of the night was to a Capitol policeman who, fences went up around the Capitol and we had come back in to certify Biden's election. It was hard to get out of the Capitol complex, and I was trying to work my way home, and at 3:30 in the morning, there was a Capitol policeman standing guard in front of a fence, and I stopped to ask him which direction I ought to go and where he had been. And he had heard his radio go off right when he got off duty, and he jumped in his car and he came back to the Capitol, did double duty. And because he wasn't officially on duty, he got the night shift and he was standing guard. And the next day, he told me he was going to go to the hospital to visit 4 of his friends who got hospitalized. So yeah, there was pushback, including my former boss, who said those who assault police officers should have been considered. And I think you will see that. I think it's sometimes befuddling to Senate Republicans who want to unify around the president, and from time to time he does things, that knowingly are provocative. He's a disruptor, and I think Mike is correct. What you see is what you get, and this was a theme of his on the campaign. But I do think it will depend issue by issue on how the reaction comes.
Okay, let's go to audience questions. When we call on you, we've got mics on either side? No? One? Okay, on either side. So when I call on you, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're studying, and your question. So let's start right here in the front row.
Oh, sorry. Hi, thank you all for being here. My name is Abby. I'm a senior in the college studying government. Full transparency, I am a Democrat, but it's been very interesting hearing you all speak today. I'm curious what y'all's thoughts are on Elon Musk's role in how the Republican Party will continue to kind of represent Trump's vision, and how Trump 2.0 will continue to, I guess, lead with this confidence that you've mentioned and kind of be more exact in his visions, what his role would be in kind of developing that and how the American public might react.
Well, I'll jump in. We have had what Doge is ostensibly going to do. We've had commissions like this set up before. Simpson Bowles is one. I know there's some others that came before that.
Al Gore's Reinventing Government.
Reinventing government. So there is government precedence for this. I am not disturbed by having outside experts, and in this case, I'm going to say Elon Musk is an outside expert in taking very static industries like the car industry and shaking it up and creating something new out of it. The same with the satellite industry with Starlink, with the solar industry as well. So bringing in an outside expert to do that, I'm actually encouraged by that. It is very difficult to get good people involved in government because of from my opinion, because of several of the ways we put up barriers to just the average, person being able to be in government. And to have somebody like an Elon Musk come from the outside and kind of shake that up, I'm actually excited about that as well. So on both the Republican and the Democratic side, I think we've got a lot of people that want to, do good for this country, that a lot of times we've created barriers that don't allow them to do that. So I'm excited to see what DOGE comes up with. It's already got, K Street shaking in their boots. I think in Congress there's a lot of programs that people are worried about that are going to get cut, and also, government agencies as well.
So why shouldn't I be annoyed that the guy who's put in charge of streamlining government, right, cutting government waste, et cetera, himself have multi-million, tens of millions of dollars in contracts with the federal government, but he's the guy in the president's ear saying what should be cut and what shouldn't be cut. And I'm asking this because for a party that's running as the party of, politically as the party of the working class right now, and he's, Mr. Drain the Swamp, the president, why shouldn't I see a disconnect there?
I mean, from my perspective, I spent 13 years on Capitol Hill. Before that, I was what I like to joke as a real lawyer doing international anti-corruption work at a large law firm and then for an international company. And then I came to Congress to do investigations and government oversight. So I am a government oversight geek. And to have the richest man in the world be like, I think government waste is bad and we should pay attention to that. This is exciting for me. I think this is good. To your direct question, candidly, the idea that somehow Elon Musk is only interested in this to make money, I think is a little bit, so he's the richest man in the world. So I don't share that general first step. Second concern, he will be there, but they've already done what they needed to do to put the right bumpers, parameters around it. It's going to run through OMB. Whether, you've got Russ Vought, who ran OMB last time. You've got Mark Paoletta, who's going to be the general counsel at OMB. You've got people that know how these government programs work, where the money is buried, what accounts actually look like. So yes, he's been very, very successful and wealthy, and he's fired a lot of people in previous jobs that led to more efficient companies. So no, I'm not worried.
Okay. Question on this side of the room? Okay, yeah. Oh, I missed it. I'll come back. Sorry.
Hi, I'm James. I'm a freshman in the SFS from Knoxville, Tennessee. And I was wondering if you all could talk a little bit about sort of the incentives that members of Congress might have to sort of stay in line with President Trump's policies. In the past, that's sort of been Donald Trump's going to choose somebody to primary you. We've seen some members like Thomas Massie, like Chip Roy, who have endorsed other candidates in the Republican primary in 2024. And so is there still an incentive for them to back all of Trump's policies at this point?
So it's House question. I'll jump in. I think it depends on, all politics is local politics, right? So there's a lot of bluster and a lot of noise and a lot of, you don't do this, I'm in a primary. Every single member really only has to answer to their own constituents. And of that 750,000 people, there's 500,000 that might vote, right? So, but it's their district, it's their people. So someone like Thomas Massie representing that district in Kentucky, Thomas Massie, to quote Jim Jordan, who wrote a book by this title, do what you say you're going to do, right? Thomas Massie goes to Kentucky and he talks to his people and they send him there, and that's how he is going to vote. And that is why he is successful and he is true to his principles, and he has, his number one priority, of course, being the debt. I don't know if you've seen his debt pen that he created. But different members have different realities, different constituencies, different districts, and so it's not an easy answer that they share one incentive, because sometimes you could have a challenger, and you could have a challenger that is backed by the currently sitting president of the United States, and it might not even be a blink. And other times, just a raised eyebrow in your direction could decimate your chances. And so it's really very much, you have to know your district and why did they send you there.
Thank you. All right, there's a question over here.
Hi, thank you guys for being here. My name is Sydney, and I'm a junior in the School of Foreign Service, and I'm from Jacksonville, Florida. And my question is, you had mentioned this idea of first principles and kind of how the Republican Party was able to pull the independent voters. My question is, when it comes to economic policy, a lot of things have been talked about, returning to the 2017 tax plan and things of that nature, but also the idea of blanket tariffs. And so I was kind of wondering, what do you think that looks like, and is that something that will negatively impact the economy? Because in my perception, that's what I've seen before.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, obviously, I was the general counsel and the parliamentarian at the Ways and Means Committee with Kevin Brady when we did Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. So I will admit my bias. I think ultimately it was, an excellent bill, and ultimately, if we were to let it expire at the end of 2025, it would be an increase of $4 trillion in tax increases, which I think proves the point that we'd said all along, that it wasn't just tax cuts for the wealthy. It actually had more tax cuts for average middle-class Americans. When you layer on top of that tariffs, I think what you heard Donald Trump say is the external, what I'm going to say it wrong.
External Revenue Service.
Thank you, the External Revenue Service. I'm going to put things in two buckets. One is actual tariffs. A lot of the tariffs that he put in place that someone like me from my Ways and Means background were skeptical of in 2017, 2018, Biden left in place because they were ultimately perceived to be good for our international relations and for the economy. Other ways in which that language has been helpful is in reminding countries, and I say this, that he could do anything, right? So I'll go back to the OECD. So you have multiple countries trying to say, we're going to tax American companies in this way. And so now you have President Trump and you have the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee saying, all right, Brussels, do your thing, but we're going to respond in this way. And will they ultimately respond in that way? I don't know, but having that hang out there has a very much an effect of keeping countries in check, which it has ultimately led to having more money in our fisc, which is what Americans care about.
Okay. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Maurice. I'm from Germany and a first-year MPP student at the McCourt school. And since we had a very American-centric discussion, and especially the last answer, I want to ask a more international question. How will the Trump foreign policy look like? How will it look like towards Europe? I think we heard a little bit about that already. But maybe to be a little too bold, when will the first American troops land in Greenland and Panama, and when will they cross the Canadian border? Obviously, I don't want an answer to that, but a broad picture of the Trump foreign policy.
I think it's, I take Mike's admonition that ultimately Trump makes his own policy seriously. I also think it's very helpful to remember that Trump is an atypical politician who comes from a business background. And I will just talk to you about the experience when he was in office the first time around, where he said that we were going to withdraw from NATO because Europeans weren't paying their fair share. If you look what actually happened under his watch, we did not withdraw from NATO. European countries started to increase their defense spending, and then Vladimir Putin put a fine point on it, and the contributions to NATO went up. So I am going to be careful not to be totally predictive, but I think sometimes it's helpful to remember that he is a businessman, and his opening offer is to somehow change behavior. And it is not necessarily what you actually see when the end comes. We saw the Prime Minister of Greenland come on national TV to say that they are interested in expanding potentially U.S. troop bases in Greenland, about getting more U.S. cooperation on critical minerals. I'm not going to, Mike probably ought to comment on this as well, but I do think some of how we see Trump approach things is to lay out something in order to coerce behavior to get a better deal. And I'm not sure we're actually going to see troops land in Greenland, but.
No, I mean, look, Trump is the ultimate wild card, especially when it comes to foreign policy. It's very. I think the NATO example is a perfect example of. He was very upset when he realized that the NATO countries were not paying their fair share. I'd also make the argument that it was because of the election of Donald Trump this time around in 2024 that brought Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran back to the table with the Israelis to actually get a hostage deal done prior to the changeover in American government, because they just weren't sure what he was going to do at that point. I think he's going to be more effective in getting the situation in Ukraine after what's now 4 or 5, almost 5 long years of war, or no, 4 years of war in Ukraine, 3 years of war in Ukraine. Both sides are worn down, and I think he's got the ability to shake it up. So the Greenland example is a perfect one. And I'll be very quick about this. I learned this very early on. Somebody said when you're negotiating with Donald Trump, generally, if you've got one position here and one position here, what you're trying to do is to get everybody in the middle. People feel like I won some, I lost some. But when you're negotiating with Donald Trump, if this is your position, he'll go, I'm over here. And so when you get over to here, and then he comes, you've basically given everything up. But that is the way that he works. And he skips a lot of the steps. And it throws typical politicians off, and it throws a wrench into international politics. But it is an effective means that he has found to get these things moving. So if we have increased presence in Greenland because he threatened to invade, or to Denmark, why won't you let us buy it? That's what you're going to get.
All right. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Michelle Mesa. Hi, Michaela. And I graduated from the McCourt School of Public Policy last year. And my question is, seeing the specific case of Matt Gaetz, right? When the nomination hearing that and ultimately didn't happen, right? Had like a whole backdrop of back and forth negotiations between President Trump before he was president, right? Before weeks before the inauguration, but you would see different brokers from the White House, from his White House, already going to the Senate to actually try to convince senators to get the votes for his nomination and for his confirmation. Ultimately, that didn't happen. So I wonder, how would other disagreements, intra-party disagreements, would be sorted out? What are your views on like other disagreements that could be coming down the road? And also, who would be the main brokers solving those disagreements outside of the leaders of both chambers? But who are other power brokers you see being critical whenever disagreements come down the line? Thank you.
I don't think anybody actually ever thought that was a thing, and I don't think that I wouldn't categorize that. I think it's an excellent question. I would just say I wouldn't categorize that as a disagreement, because I don't think anybody ever thought it was a thing, right? So it was a cute, fun lark, not fun for everybody watching, maybe, but fun for maybe the players involved. But he was never going to be the Attorney General of the United States, and I'm sure he didn't think so. And
it certainly sent a message.
It certainly got him out of the house.
To FBI, to everybody. Well, he also, I think it was a deal with the devil, because he had the ethics report that was coming out as well. So it got,
came out.
and we weren't talking about Hegseth. We weren't talking about Tulsi Gabbard. We were talking about Matt Gaetz. And again, this is Trump pushing it so far, and he failed on that. But nobody was, to your point, it wasn't serious.
So that's my question.
No, I think he
don't
succeeded.
know if he failed, because I don't think he thought that Matt Gaetz was ever going to be Attorney General. So
That's
did he?
absolutely-
So that's the point I'm making.
We are in violent agreement with each other.
Neither Donald Trump nor Matt Gaetz thought that Matt Gaetz was going to be the Attorney General of the United States. If some of you did, I apologize for that profusely on behalf of the country. But really, what happened was that it was almost like, look what I could do. And then all of a sudden, Pam Bondi, like I happen to think very highly of Pam Bondi, she's a friend. Like, no one's going to criticize. I mean, they're trying to, but they haven't landed a punch. I mean, they set the record, they matched the record in confirmation hearings prior to, in one day. It was 6, I think it was the record. So they did 6 confirmation hearings one day. Before that, they had Pete Hegseth by himself. They had, I was listening to both Doug Collins and Annalise Stefanik today. I mean, it just whirlwind, to your point earlier, of them being, and then there was just no criticism really lodged, and no punches landed at all. And so I think that was game, set, match.
Sharon, are there any other nominees that you think are teetering in the Senate? Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., any predictions?
There are remaining questions about her,
yeah. All right, we are almost out of time. We'll take one more, and then I've got one to close, so let's go right here.
Yes, hello. I'm a student. I'm French student from Sciences Po Paris, here at the McCourt School. I have a question. How do you see the future of Trumpism? So after Trump, I know it's on the long term, but who can embody so Trumpism? And if Trumpism is dismantled, who will take the big share? Thank you.
I actually think this is an easy one. He's a unique individual. I don't think that there is necessarily anyone that would fill his shoes. There's obvious choices of the vice president, J.D. Vance, who I fully expect is going to run for the presidency in 28. There are others that represent certain segments of the MAGA coalition, but Donald J. Trump is a very unique individual that is, and he came from a very unique spot, being a celebrity, being a developer, being in this business of public conversation since the 70s. And I'm not sure that there's anybody else currently on the stage that fills that role.
I think there have been members who have tried to imitate his approach, and it hasn't worked.
And where's Matt Gaetz now again?
Yeah.
Modern history has shown that one-party control doesn't always last very long. And so if you are all advising your respective chambers or bosses or what have you, what's the thing they should be worried about? Right? They've got 2 years to make the case that they should keep one-party control. What should they be worried about over these coming months?
I think some of the pace of Donald Trump shows that he's already thinking about that. 1 term, 2 years, and the idea that you get as much as you possibly can done in 2 years because you don't know what's coming next, particularly given the numbers in the House. I think that's just a reality. And so some of the frenetic pace that you see him trying to set, I think, is both to show his energy vis-a-vis his predecessor, to show his seriousness in terms of trying to get the job done. But I think that the ticking clock is always there when you look at midterm elections.
Yeah, I think we'll be judged on the economy. I think at the end of the day, we got to get the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act We got to get that renewed. I am in the one reconciliation bill camp because I know how hard it is to pass a bill. So that's where my default is. One big beautiful bill.
Yes.
But I think if we can give that surety to small businesses, to American families, that the tax cuts are not going away, that you can hire, that you can invest, that you can move forward with research and development plans, that provides kind of like a solve to everything else. And so that is, I think, the first and most kind of important thing that has to happen. And if we fail there, then, and again, like 2 years, it's really 18 months. And so they got to move.
I mean, promises made, promises kept is going to be the mantra of this. If they are able to get the economy, get prices down, if we have some peace in the world where we don't have these conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and there is some direction forward where we're cooling off the numbers of individuals that are coming up to the southern border, I think those are the things that are going to be judged. To your point, though, Mo, I'm not even sure that's going to be enough. Even if they hit on all four of those, you still have this innate American need for change, and I think that's why speed is the key. And so what you're going to see is the Senate is going to work weekends. Who knew that they could? Let alone Mondays and Fridays,
Senate works
but
very
weekends.
hard.
So exactly. So we're gonna see a lot of movement, and I might even say it's in the next 12 months. But it's going to be a lot of speed, and they're going to do their best to get there. But even with that, I'm not sure it's going to be enough.
All right. Well, we'll check back in 12 months. If eggs and milk aren't any cheaper, then we'll have a different conversation than if they are. Sharon, Machalagh, Mike, thank you all so much. Thank all of you for joining us tonight. Couple of big things coming up. Thursday night, meet the new class of GU Politics Fellows, where they all arrive for orientation Thursday morning. They're super pumped. I've been talking to them all, and they'll be on the stage together Thursday night. And if you are not on our email list, I highly recommend you join it tonight for some announcements that may or may not be coming tomorrow. So with that, thank you all very much.